Hi, everybody. It's my great pleasure to welcome Stephen Long onto the Recruiter Enablement channel today. And we're going to be talking about achieving influence. And I think there is a big link between influence and recruiter enablement. We're going to come on to some of the tactical aspects of that shortly. I've told this to Stephen. I don't know if we've said this publicly, but I'm going to say it publicly. I joined a course that Stephen was running back in 2003, I think it was, all around achieving influence in the recruitment world. And it was really very transformative. And I still, 20 years later, use a lot of the things that I learned from that course. So, Stephen, you've been a big influence on my career. Give us a quick introduction to you.
Well, can I first of all say that when we first met, I was about 6 years old. So I've just got to put that out there as an aside. Yeah, my career is slightly varied. I've been focused on influence as opposed to sales skills for getting on for 30 years. There's a distinct difference between influence and selling that we can get into if it's appropriate later. But all my research, all my training, and all my businesses have been based around influence. I had a training business that I ran for nearly 20 years initially, and then segued, having trained 50,000 recruiters, I kind of segued over into running my own search firm, which I built and sold. And then for the last 7 years since then, I've been back into the training and coaching field, particularly emphasizing on working with recruiters and TA professionals. So that's really what I do. That's really what I've done. I've tried working in other industries. I've tried doing other things, but honestly, I found it dull. I like working with people who are working with people because there's nothing more interesting and exciting than helping people get better at that. So that's really what I specialize in. I could probably make more money doing other things, but this is the fun bit. So that's what I emphasize.
I couldn't agree more. That's why I've been in this world since 1999. It's what keeps me in this world. So, um, let's talk about the type of influence that people need to achieve within recruiting. I mean, there's like multiple stakeholders. There's candidates. There's hiring managers. There's other stakeholders. Like, what are the different things that we're trying to accomplish?
Well, I guess the most important thing is to balance out the requirements and the desires of those different stakeholders, because yeah, the old cliche is that we're the only industry in the world that has two different customers or two different products, depending on how you view it. Because we're trying to make the candidate fall in love with the company, and the company fall in love with the candidate. But most people go at that process of understanding the desires and the wants of all those disparate people, almost with a shotgun approach. It's like, okay, I think I know what kind of person we need. I'll go and find that person, and then I'll sell it hard to all the other stakeholders. And that can work, but it's inefficient, and it's slow, and it's very, very stressful. Whereas if you take a step back, because the easiest way to influence somebody, the easiest way to achieve influence with somebody, is to actually genuinely understand what they want and how they know that they've found it. And that's the second piece, is the most important distinction. It's quite easy to identify what somebody wants. You can simply ask them intelligently, but to find out how they'll know they've got it, that's a whole other section. That's a whole other piece that most people just, well, I was going to say they miss out. Most people don't even think about it. That they understand the requirements, and then they assume that once they understand the requirement, they'll be able to present the candidate or the opportunity as matching that. And it doesn't always happen, which is why you end up with conversations where, well, hang on, you said you wanted this, and I've just delivered it. Yeah, but it doesn't feel right, or I'm not convinced. That's because the second piece of understanding how they'll know they've found it just hasn't been addressed.
It's like about going deeper, isn't it? It's about
Yeah,
you making me think of the five whys and the sort of like
yeah,
getting to the real root of, well, what do you want? I want to earn more money. Well, why? And why and why and why? But also that's a brilliant one. How will you know when you've achieved that? Why will
Yeah,
you know when you've got what it is you need? This applies in equal measure to candidates and hiring managers, I think. Is that correct?
completely. Yeah, absolutely 100%. In fact, as a recruiter, I spend more time focusing on how the hiring manager will know, because this is a bit superficial, but the requirements of most candidates are less complex, less complicated than the requirements of most hiring managers, because the candidate has, they've got their family, they've got their career ambitions, they've got their goals. The hiring manager has their boss's boss, HR, the business goals, the business requirements, their personal tastes and foibles. It's a much more complex mix normally with the hiring manager than it is with the candidate. Not always the case. The more senior you go, the less that becomes true. But generally speaking, it's a much more profound process. And you're right, 5 whys is a great, I'm not going to denigrate it, it's a great starting point, because below the fifth why, which is normally where you get the aha moment, oh yeah, I hadn't realized that, is that extra piece, which I'm going to simplify as, and how will you know that you've got it? Or how will you know that this opportunity, or how will you know that this candidate is going to deliver that?
And
And that's normally where you hit that look on somebody's face where they go slightly glazed because they've never thought about it before.
yeah,
That's when you know
you've
you've
got
achieved
some
something useful.
absolutely. So you've got some sophisticated and successful models, and I've used some of them. And I remember a 13-week process of
Mm,
embedding a lot of this stuff in. But when somebody's just getting started, I'm a big believer in, and this is where we come on to recruiter enablement, right? So
mm,
recruiter, to be really effectively enabled, a recruiter needs things like job descriptions and policies and processes and interview questions and social media posts and all sorts of different things, research, etc. Um, I think that they need assets which help them to be able to achieve influence, and especially at the beginning. And those assets might include things like props. They might include things like scripts, crib sheets. What are the different assets that you might recommend? And yeah, give us some background on this.
well, if I take a step back for a second, Adam, I was mentioning this earlier. I was recording some social yesterday, and it was the question I posed myself is, how do I decide whether I'm going to use a script or a crib sheet? And it's a very simple questioning process. Am I perfect at everything, at all times, in all ways? And can I come up with the perfect response and the perfect phrasing of a question and be entirely capable of dealing with anything the world might throw with me at all times? And if the answer to those two questions is no, I'm going to use a script or a template. And the answer to those two questions is never yes. So I'll always use a script, a template. With enough practice, you refer to it less and less. But whether I'm doing something as slightly stress inducing as calling a candidate from cold, or whether I'm doing something more straightforward like the follow-up questions. So you ask the standard template interview questions. How do I go deeper? What are the questions that I can use in a standard way to go deeper on somebody's answers? Because obviously you can't predict what somebody's going to respond or how somebody's going to respond, but you can plan your responses. So, you might say that you're looking for X, yeah, and I'll go, okay, well, back to the crib sheet. How do you mean? In what way? Could you give me an example? What's your definition? And I'd have those four of my standard go-tos to start digging deeper, rather than simply going for the why every time, because it's a massively useful tool, but people get bored. I'll just ask the same question in different ways. And what I'm looking for is precision. I'm looking for a definition that I can scratch a piece of glass with. And I use a crib sheet. I use, not if that's not a script. A script would be if I'm contacting somebody. A script would be if I'm um, following a predefined process with something. Template would be if I'm using emails and things like that. So, you know, um, as you'd expect, I promote training and coaching. So yeah, I do a lot of emailing. Sorry, folks. I do a lot of emailing, but they follow templates. So irrespective of which particular aspects of my businesses I'm promoting, I have templates that I've tested that fill in the blanks will create certain responses, certain levels of success that I can repeat in fairly straightforward ways.
I agree with a lot of the things you've just said there. So the five whys, which I mentioned, for example, is quite a contrived sort of approach, and that, yeah, right. You get bored with the why.
Mm,
It sounds artificial. It's quite a good self-diagnosis type thing, or
mm,
like thing to do with yourself to understand why. But certainly the asking things in different ways to get to it's like maybe an onion as well. It's like
yep,
the onion technique, and kind of layering more, but
yep,
also getting more information for yourself, but at the same time having the other person sort of self-discover. Actually, that's a good reason why I think about that. That's
mm,
why I'm drawn towards that, or why I'm repelled from that.
yes, yep,
Repelled, repelled and drawn
yeah.
to.
Because we're looking for what they're motivated toward and what they're motivated away from. So either of those responses is equally valid. There's been a lot of research with, if you like, classical NLP around the precision model, or if you work with Richard Bandler, it'd be the meta model, which is slightly incomprehensible as a term for most people. But the precision model, there's so many different ways you can dig deeper and pull the information out of somebody. But all I've tried to do is simplify it down to, for me, what how can I shorten those questions down and still get the maximum response? So those four that I mentioned, how do you mean? In what way? Could you give me an example? What's your definition? If I use those four questions in combination, normally with a tilt of the head, how do you mean? In what way? You can normally pull pretty much everything you ever need from somebody just by combining those four questions and just waiting until you hear, and I want to make sure I pronounce this properly, vowel noises. Once you hear somebody go, ooh, you've made them think. Yeah.
So I just want to quickly touch on one other aspect of something you've said. I don't think there is a definitive answer to that, but I'd be really interested in your perspective. You talked about email, you talked about talking to somebody on the telephone. Like, the amount of different channels we have
Mm.
today for communicating with people has never been more varied. Any advice? What works?
Oh my God. Thank you for that one. There is actually, I believe, a simple hierarchy. If you look at effectiveness in terms of getting the result that you're looking for, excuse me, it's sorry about that. It's descending in terms of the personal interaction with somebody. So face to face is always the most effective. Video second, phone call third. Then you drop very dramatically down to group presentations of any kind, so it's a webinar and those sorts of things, and then even further when you get down to email. All of my testing and all the work I've done on it, bizarrely, email is about the same as social media DM. You wouldn't think it would be, but it is. You'd think DMs rank higher. Um, One thing that does rank very highly in terms of getting a response from somebody is WhatsApp. It's hugely effective because it feels personal in the same way that Facebook message doesn't. So in terms of hierarchy of effectiveness, it'd be face-to-face, video, phone, webinar, or multi-person Zoom conversation. Then you're down to WhatsApp, and then it drops dramatically below that. But I've never found a lot of difference between email and DMs, frankly.
No, I don't think so either. And I recognize everything you just said. It seems logical to me, and I totally understand it. Stephen, I could talk to you for hours, and I don't want to take up that much of your time though. What are the sorts of things that a talent acquisition team might like want to do with you, and how should they contact you?
Well, they can contact me through either LinkedIn or any social media platform. LinkedIn is probably the most reliable. I've also got a YouTube channel, which is Stephen Long Helping Recruiters. In terms of the other work that I do, there's a couple of aspects to it. One is one-to-one coaching, which is very intensive and not for the faint-hearted. It has to be said. You've been there, you know exactly what I mean. And secondly, I run a community for TA professionals and recruiters called the Influence Academy. It's essentially a combination of a training platform and a community where we all hang out and we all learn from each other. That's the way of communicating with me, basically.
Wonderful.
But everybody get in touch. I'm always happy to talk to anybody.
It's been a pleasure to talk to you again, Stephen.
Always.
And I'm looking forward to seeing you again.
Thank you. You too. Take care, Adam.